I'm Alice, 28 female. I live in a small, rent-controlled apartment that always smells faintly of oil paint and turpentine, a scent I've come to associate with home. For the past 6 years, my life has been a carefully balanced equation of part-time waitressing jobs and long, glorious hours spent in front of a canvas in my converted bedroom studio. This is my life as a portrait artist. My family calls it my struggling phase, but I've always just considered it the work before the work pays off. Little did I know how big that payoff would be, and how it would completely upend the family that pitied me. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Chapter 1: A Toast to the Golden Child. The Sunday dinner was a tradition as old as my memory, but its flavor had changed over the years. What was once a noisy, joyful gathering had slowly calcified into a weekly performance. A stage for my older brother, Mark, to hold court, and for my parents, Susan and David, to bask in the glow of their successful son. I, of course, was the silent, supporting cast member. This particular Sunday felt heavier, charged with an unspoken announcement. The air in my parents' cozy, book-lined living room was thick with the smell of my mother's roast chicken and my father's quiet pride. Mark, ever the master of ceremonies, arrived 30 minutes late, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my last 3 months of art supplies. He kissed our mother's cheek, shook our father's hand with a firm, lawyerly grip, and gave me a cursory nod. "Alice, still playing with paints." "Still practicing law, Mark," I replied, my voice sweeter than I felt. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "It pays the bills, and then some." We gathered around the polished mahogany table, a family heirloom that had witnessed generations of arguments and celebrations. My mother, Susan, a retired librarian with kind eyes and a tendency to worry, fluttered around, making sure everyone's glass was full. My father, David, a retired civil engineer whose life was governed by logic and practicality, sat at the head of the table, observing his son with an expression of deep satisfaction. To them, Mark was a finished product, a secure investment. He was a corporate lawyer at 34, with a corner office, a German sedan, and a portfolio that he loved to casually mention. I was the variable, the unpredictable artist. They loved me, I knew, but they didn't understand me. My life of turpentine smells, stained fingers, and financial uncertainty was a constant source of low-grade anxiety for them. They saw my passion as a hobby that had gotten out of hand, a phase I was supposed to outgrow. "So," Mark began, after taking a deliberate sip of wine, "I have some news." He paused for dramatic effect, a courtroom tactic he employed even at the dinner table. "Sarah and I are putting an offer on a house." My mother gasped, her hands flying to her chest. "Oh, Mark, that's wonderful." My father beamed. "A house? That's a big step, son. A smart one. Property is the only real investment." He glanced at me for a fraction of a second, a silent addendum hanging in the air, unlike art. Mark soaked in their adoration. "It's a great place. 4 bedrooms, big yard in that new development over by the lake, good school district for when we have kids." He laid out his future like a blueprint, every detail planned, every contingency covered. "The only hurdle is the down payment. The market is competitive, and we need to come in with a strong offer to be taken seriously." He looked from my mother to my father, his gaze steady and confident. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I knew what was coming. This wasn't just an announcement, it was a prelude to a proposal. I watched as he skillfully, deliberately, began to build his case, not for the house, but for what he wanted from them. He spoke about stability, about legacy, about building something that would last. He painted a picture of future family gatherings in his spacious new home, of grandchildren playing in a secure, manicured lawn. My own world felt a million miles away from that picture. My world was a cramped apartment, the thrill of getting a gallery show in a small, independent space, the quiet joy of mixing the perfect color on my palette. It was a world they couldn't see, and one Mark was actively painting over with his own grand vision. It's just so much, the down payment, my mother said, her brow furrowed with concern. Even with your salary. It is, Mark agreed, nodding gravely. Which is why I wanted to talk to you both. It's a delicate subject. He let the words hang in the air, creating a bubble of suspense. I know you have your savings, the nest egg you've both worked so hard for your entire lives. My father leaned forward, his expression serious. What are you proposing, son? I'm proposing an investment, Mark said smoothly. An investment in the family's future. If you could help me with the down payment, I would of course pay it back over time. But more than that, you'd be securing a foundation for all of us. A central place for this family to grow. He looked at me, a flicker of what I could only describe as pity in his eyes. It's about being established, about making the sensible choice. The unspoken comparison was deafening. He was the sensible choice. I was the risk. His life was a sure thing, mine was a gamble. I felt the weight of their collective gaze, the silent calculation happening in my parents' minds. They were thinking of their hard-earned money, their desire for security, and the 2 children in front of them. One, a successful lawyer promising them a dynasty. The other, a struggling artist who barely scraped by. I didn't say a word. I just picked at my roast chicken, the food tasteless in my mouth. My silence was taken as assent, as an acknowledgement of my place in the family hierarchy. Well, my father said slowly, looking at my mother, it's a lot to think about. Of course, Mark said, leaning back in his chair, confident he had already won. Take your time, but the offer has to be in by Wednesday. He raised his glass. For now, a toast to the future. My parents raised their glasses. After a moment's hesitation, I raised mine too. I clinked my glass against theirs, the sound echoing the hollow feeling in my chest. I was toasting my brother's success, a success that was about to be funded by the very nest egg that was meant to be a safety net for us both. But in that moment, in their eyes, there was only one child who needed a foundation. The other was just expected to float. Chapter 2, The Sensible Investment. The phone call came 2 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my studio, wrestling with a particularly difficult patch of canvas, trying to capture the way light fell across an old man's weathered face in a photograph. My hands were smudged with raw umber and titanium white. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the quiet concentration. It was my mother. Alice, honey, do you have a minute to talk? Her voice was gentle, but I could hear the underlying strain. Of course, Mom, what's up? I put my brush down, wiping my hands on an already filthy rag. Your father and I have been talking, a lot, about Mark's proposal. I sat down on my paint-splattered stool. Okay. We've decided to do it, she said, the words coming out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would lessen their impact. We're going to give him the money for the down payment. Even though I had expected it, the finality of her statement landed like a punch. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what the decision represented. It was a formal declaration of who they believed in, a notarized certificate of my perceived inadequacy. I remained silent, letting her fill the space. Honey, are you there? I'm here, I said, my voice quiet. We know this might be difficult for you to hear, she continued, her voice laced with a careful, rehearsed sympathy. We want you to understand our reasoning. It's not about choosing him over you. It's about making a sensible investment. There was that word again. Sensible. It was the word they used to justify a decision that felt anything but. It was a shield against the emotional fallout. Your father did the math, she went on, as if a spreadsheet could explain away the hurt. Mark has a solid plan to pay it back. He's established, his career is stable. A house is a tangible asset. It grows in value. It's secure. And I'm not, I finished for her. It wasn't a question. She sighed, a sound heavy with a mixture of guilt and frustration. Oh, Alice, that's not what we're saying. We are so proud of your talent. We are. But an art career, it's so uncertain. We worry about you constantly. We see you working so hard, waitressing to make ends meet, pouring everything into your paintings that you sell for a few $100s here and there. We just want you to be safe. a few $100s here and there. That's what they saw. They didn't see the years of honing my craft, the technical skill, the emotional depth I poured into every piece. They didn't see the small commissions that were slowly getting bigger, the feature in a local art blog, the growing list of clients who sought me out for my unique style. They saw a struggling girl playing with paints, not a professional building a business. They saw the struggle, not the art. So, the money from the savings, it's all going to him? I asked, needing to hear the complete truth. There was a pause. Most of it, she admitted. It's a very significant down payment. There won't be much left, I'm afraid, just enough for emergencies. The nest egg, the fund that my father had always spoke. N of with reverence, the one he said was for both his children, for a rainy day or a big start, was being liquidated for one child's sunny afternoon. I see, I said. The two words felt impossibly heavy. Mark argued, and your father agrees, that this helps the whole family in the long run, she tried again, desperate for me to co-sign her logic. He says a rising tide lifts all boats. His tide is a tsunami, Mom. My boat is a canoe. I'm going to be swamped, I said, the metaphor spilling out before I could stop it. Don't be so dramatic, Alice, she chided gently. We would never let you be swamped. We just have to be practical. This is a practical decision. Practical, sensible, secure. Their vocabulary was a fortress, built to withstand any emotional assault I might launch. But I had no intention of launching one. What was the point? Arguing would only reinforce their perception of me as emotional and irrational, the temperamental artist, while Mark was the cool, logical man of reason. My anger, my hurt, my profound sense of betrayal, none of it would register as valid. It would be dismissed as jealousy. So I did the last thing they expected me to do. I took a deep breath, pushing down the tidal wave of emotions inside me. I made my voice calm, even, and perhaps a little weary. Okay, Mom. Okay, she sounded surprised and a little relieved. Yes, okay, I understand, I lied. You and Dad have worked hard your whole lives for that money. It's yours to do with as you see fit. If you think this is the right decision, then I'm happy for Mark. I really am. The relief in her sigh was palpable. Oh, honey, thank you, that's so mature of you. I was so worried you'd be upset. I'm not upset, I continued, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I want him to be happy. I want you both to be happy. Please, don't worry about me. I'll be fine. I always am. We ended the call a few minutes later. I put the phone down and stared at my canvas, the old man's face looking back at me. For a long time, I just sat there, motionless. The smell of turpentine suddenly felt cloying, the silence of my apartment oppressive. They had made their sensible investment. They had chosen the sure thing. They had written me off. That evening, I called my brother. Hey, I said when he picked up. Alice, what's up? He asked, his tone brisk and busy. Mom told me the news, about the down payment. Congratulations on the house. Ah, right, thanks, he said, a note of triumph in his voice. They made the right call, the smart call. It's for the best, you'll see. When you're all still renting in 10 years and I'm hosting Christmas in my backyard, you'll get it. I get it now, Mark, I said softly. I just wanted to call and say I'm happy for you. No hard feelings. Good, that's good to hear, he said, clearly pleased with my capitulation. Glad you're not making this a whole dramatic thing. It's just logic. You can't argue with logic. No, I said, looking around my studio at the canvases stacked against the wall, each one a piece of my soul. You can't. After I hung up, I stood up and walked back to my easel. I picked up my brush. The hurt was still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut. But something else was there now, too. A quiet, burning resolve. They thought they knew my value. They had appraised me and found me wanting. They thought my world was small, a quaint hobby that didn't pay. Fine, let them think that. Let them toast to the golden child and his sensible investment. My time was coming. I dipped my brush in the paint and made the first, deliberate stroke. I had work to do. Chapter 3, An Unexpected Patron. The week after my family's sensible investment. A thick gray gloom settled over my life, mirroring the overcast sky outside my apartment window. The joy I usually found in my studio had been dulled. Every brushstroke felt heavier, every color seemed a little less vibrant. The praise I'd given my brother, the understanding I'd offered my parents, it had all been a performance, and the emotional toll was higher than I'd anticipated. I was waitressing extra shifts, the physical exhaustion a welcome distraction from the mental and emotional fatigue. My art, my sanctuary, felt tainted by their judgment. It was on a particularly bleak Thursday morning that everything changed. I was cleaning my brushes, the rhythmic motion doing little to soothe my frayed nerves, when my laptop pinged with a new email. I glanced at the screen, expecting it to be another gallery rejection or a promotional email for cheap canvas. But the sender's name made me pause. Billionaire Vance, Office of Julian Croft. I frowned. The name Julian Croft rang a distant bell, but I couldn't place it. He was one of those names you hear in the background of the news, a tech mogul, an innovator, someone who existed in a stratosphere so far removed from my own that he was practically a fictional character. The subject line read, Commissio. An inquiry. My heart gave a nervous flutter. It was probably a mistake, spam that had somehow slipped through my filter. With a sense of cynical curiosity, I clicked it open. Dear Ms. Hayes, my name is Billionaire Vance, and I am the Chief of Staff for Mr. Julian Croft. Mr. Croft has recently become aware of your work after seeing your piece, City Dweller, 3 a.m., at the Carmichael Gallery's Emerging Artists Showcase last month. He was exceptionally impressed with your unique approach to portraiture, particularly your use of light and your ability to convey a subject's inner world. Mr. Croft is a dedicated patron of the arts and is interested in commissioning a personal portrait. This would be a significant project, and he has specifically requested you. He feels your style is precisely what he is looking for. If you are interested in discussing this opportunity further, please let me know your availability for a preliminary video call with myself and Mr. Croft early next week. Sincerely, Billionaire Vance. I read the email 3 times. My hands were trembling. The Carmichael Gallery Showcase was a small, local event I'd almost backed out of. The piece he'd seen, City Dweller, 3 a.m., was a portrait of my neighbor, an elderly man named George, who I'd often see sitting by his window in the dead of night, bathed in the blue glow of his television. I'd sold it for $400 to a nice couple who just liked the colors. I never imagined someone like Julian Croft had even been there. A commission, a significant project, from a billionaire. It felt like a dream, a wild, impossible fantasy. For a moment, I was convinced it was a cruel prank, perhaps orchestrated by one of Mark's smug friends. But the email was professional, the domain name was legitimate. This was real. With shaking fingers, I typed out a reply, checking it for typos a dozen times before hitting send. I confirmed my interest and availability, trying to sound professional and not like a person who was currently hyperventilating over a bowl of murky turpentine water. The video call was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the entire weekend in a state of suspended disbelief, cleaning my studio until it was spotless and choosing an outfit that I hoped screamed serious artist and not waitress who lives on instant noodles. When Monday arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. I sat in front of my laptop, my portfolio open on the desk, my heart pounding against my ribs. The call connected, and 2 faces appeared on my screen. One was a sharp, intelligent-looking woman in her 40s, Billionaire Vance. The other was Julian Croft. He wasn't what I expected. Instead of a severe, intimidating corporate titan, I saw a man in his late 50s with kind, perceptive eyes, a warm smile, and a head of silver hair. He was wearing a simple gray sweater, not a suit. He was in what looked like a home library, surrounded by books and art. Ms. Hayes, Alice, thank you for making the time, he began, his voice calm and resonant. I hope we're not interrupting your creative process. Not at all, Mr. Croft. It's an honor to speak with you, I managed, my voice steadier than I expected. Please call me Julian, he said with a smile. I'll get straight to the point. Eleanor mentioned I saw your work, City Dweller. I stood in front of that painting for 20 minutes. You didn't just paint a man by a window. You painted loneliness and resilience and the history of a life lived. You did it with light and shadow. It was masterful. I was floored. He spoke about my work with a depth of understanding that even I struggled to articulate. He didn't talk about it as a decorative object, but as a piece of communication, of storytelling. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of my old artistic pride return. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved. That means a great deal. We spoke for almost an hour. He asked about my process, my inspirations, my other work. He was knowledgeable, not just as a collector, but as a true enthusiast. He wasn't just buying a status symbol, he was investing in a creator. Then, he laid out the proposal. I want you to paint my portrait, he said, for the lobby of my company's new headquarters, but I don't want a traditional, stiff corporate portrait. I want what you did for that city dweller. I want something real, something that tells a story. Eleanor Vance then took over, discussing the logistics. The size of the canvas would be massive, nearly 5 feet tall. There would be several in-person sittings at his home office. And then she got to the fee. When she named the number, I nearly fell off my stool. It was more money than I had made in the last 5 years combined. It was enough to live on for years. It was enough to rent a proper studio, to buy the finest materials, to never have to waitress another shift again unless I wanted to. It was a life-changing sum of money. Additionally, Eleanor said, her tone professional, Mr. Croft's compensation package for a commission of this magnitude is comprehensive. It includes the fee, of course, as well as a materials budget. And he often likes to include a personal bonus upon completion, tailored to the artist. I was so stunned I could barely speak. I just nodded, my mind reeling. So, Alice, Julian said, his warm gaze fixed on me, is this something you would be interested in? The question was absurd. Interested? This was a lifeline. This was validation. This was a cannonball aimed directly at the fortress of my family's low expectations. A wide, genuine smile spread across my face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Yes, Julian, I said, my voice filled with a newfound confidence. I would be very interested. I would be honored. He smiled back, a look of genuine delight on his face. Excellent. I have a feeling we're going to create something extraordinary together. After the call ended, I sat in the silence of my studio, the laptop screen dark. The gray gloom that had been suffocating me had vanished, replaced by a brilliant, dazzling light. It was the light of opportunity, of recognition, of a future I had only dared to dream of. My parents had made their sensible investment in a house of bricks and mortar. But a stranger, a billionaire, had just made an investment in me. And I was determined to give him the greatest return he had ever seen. Chapter 4, Connecting the Dots. The first sitting with Julian Croft was at his home, a stunning piece of modern architecture nestled in the hills overlooking the city. It wasn't a mansion in the gaudy sense. It was a curated space, filled with light, art, and an overwhelming sense of calm. The walls were adorned with works by masters, both classic and contemporary. My little city dweller wouldn't have looked out of place. Julian was an incredible subject. He was patient, engaging, and possessed a quiet intensity that I was eager to capture. During our sessions, we would talk for hours. He was endlessly curious about my life, my process, and my perspective on the world. He spoke of his own life not with arrogance, but with a sense of wonder, as if he was still surprised by his own success. He talked about technology, philanthropy, and his belief that true innovation came from empowering creative people. The world is built by engineers and lawyers, Alice, he told me during our second sitting, a wry smile on his face. But it's made worth living in by artists and storytellers. Never forget that. His words were a soothing balm on the wounds my family's pragmatism had inflicted. Here was one of the most successful men in the world, validating my life's work in a way my own father, a retired engineer, never could. I spent the weeks between sittings in a frenzy of creative energy. I sketched relentlessly, experimenting with composition and color palettes. I filled my studio with charcoal studies of his face, his hands, the way he held his head when he was deep in thought. The project consumed me in the best possible way. For the first time, I felt like a true professional, a master of my craft on the cusp of creating my magnum opus. The crucial connection was made during our third session. I was packing up my supplies when Julian, looking over some documents with his chief of staff, Billionaire, mentioned a new acquisition. "The Northwood Properties deal is finalized then?" he asked her. "Yes, sir," Billionaire confirmed. "The portfolio transfer was completed this morning. We are now the official owners and property managers for all 12 buildings in the district." "Good," Julian nodded. "I want to start the revitalization project immediately. First step, let's get a letter out to all the tenants. I don't want them to be alarmed by the change in ownership. Reassure them that their leases will be honored and that we plan on making significant improvements to the buildings. No one's rent is going up." The name Northwood Properties snagged my attention. It sounded familiar. I thought back, a vague memory stirring. Hadn't my parents mentioned that name? Their building had been owned by some faceless corporation for years. Later that evening, curiosity gnawing at me, I called my mother. "Hey, Mom, quick question," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Who owns your apartment building again? What's the name of the management company?" "Oh, it's some big company, Northwood Properties," she said. "Why do you ask?" The phone felt cold in my hand. My blood ran still. It couldn't be. "No reason," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Just saw the name somewhere and thought it sounded familiar. So everything's okay over there." "Well, it's funny you should ask," she said, her voice dropping into its familiar, worried tone. "We just got a letter today. The building has been sold. We have a new owner." My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat. "A new owner? Who is it?" "Some tech billionaire, I think." The letter was very corporate sounding. "Croft Enterprises, or something like that. They say they're not going to raise the rent, but you know how these things go. A rich man like that buys up a bunch of buildings, and sooner or later, people like us get pushed out for luxury condos. Your father is already stressing about it." Croft Enterprises, Julian Croft, my patron, my client. The man who was paying me a small fortune to paint his portrait was my parents' new landlord. The world tilted on its axis. The pieces of the puzzle, scattered across my life for the past month, suddenly slammed into place with breathtaking force. The random chance of him seeing my painting, the life-changing commission, his offhand comment about a new property acquisition, my parents' anxiety over their new landlord. It wasn't a series of disconnected events. It was a single, elegant, and earth-shatteringly ironic tapestry. I felt a dizzying mix of emotions. Shock, of course, but underneath it, a wild, exhilarating thrill. It was too perfect. It was cosmic. It was the kind of plot twist you see in a movie, except it was happening to me. For a moment, I considered telling them. I could call my parents right now and alleviate all their fears. I could tell them their new landlord was a kind, art-loving man who had no intention of kicking them out. I could tell them I was painting his portrait. But then I thought of Mark. I thought of his smug, triumphant face as he accepted their life savings. I thought of his lecture on sensible investments and rising tides. I thought of him picturing me renting a tiny apartment in 10 years while he hosted Christmas in his sprawling backyard. And a new thought began to form. A plan. It was audacious, a little terrifying, and utterly brilliant. The commission came with a bonus, Billionaire had said. A personal bonus tailored to the artist. I looked around my studio, at the sketches of Julian Croft's powerful, benevolent face. I had been tasked with capturing his essence, with telling a story through his portrait. Now, I realized I had a much bigger story to tell. The unveiling of this portrait wouldn't just be an art event, it would be a reckoning. I spent the next hour online, cross-referencing public property records. It was all there in black and white. Croft Enterprises, LLC, was the new owner of the building my parents had lived in for 30 years. The building where my brother had stood just a few weeks ago and declared himself the family's only secure investment. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost comical. My brother, the corporate lawyer, had convinced my parents to liquidate their savings to secure his future, all while casting me as the financially irresponsible artist. He had made them feel insecure about their own home, warning them about the precarity of renting, a precarity he was now immune to. And in a single, beautiful twist of fate, their security now rested in the hands of the very man who was underwriting my future. Mark thought he was playing chess, moving pieces around a board he controlled. He didn't realize the board itself had just been bought, and the new owner was on my team. A wide, slow smile spread across my face. The investigation was over. It was time to start painting. Chapter 5: The Portrait of Power. The painting became my world. Every waking moment was dedicated to the massive canvas that now dominated my studio. It was more than a commission, it was a mission. Every decision, from the composition to the finest detail, was infused with the secret knowledge I now possessed. This wasn't just a portrait of Julian Croft, it was a portrait of power, of benevolence, and of the quiet, unseen forces that shape our lives. I chose to depict him not in a stiff, corporate pose, but seated in his library, bathed in the warm, golden light from a window. One hand rested on an open book, the other on the arm of his chair, relaxed but firm. The background was filled with the rich textures of wood and leather, but I kept the details slightly soft, drawing the viewer's eye to the man himself. The real work was in his expression. I wanted to capture the duality I'd come to know, the brilliant innovator and the kind, perceptive man. I layered the paint, building up the tones in his face, working to get the precise glint in his eye, a look that conveyed both immense intelligence and a deep, empathetic warmth. It was the look he had given me when he spoke about my art, a look of genuine respect. It was the look of a man who understood value beyond a balance sheet. As I painted, I had conversations with my family that felt like scenes from a surreal play. "How is the art thing going?" my father asked during one of our weekly calls, his tone attempting casual interest. "It's going well, Dad," I replied, dabbing a tiny highlight onto Julian's cheek. "I'm working on a big project right now, a commission." "Oh, that's nice," he said, the way one might talk. "About a new knitting project. Is it paying? You know, with your mother and I worrying about this new landlord, money is tight." "The commission is paying very well, Dad," I said calmly. "And please, try not to worry about the landlord. I'm sure everything will be fine." Then there was Mark. He called one afternoon, his voice booming with self-satisfaction. "Just closed on the house, little sister. The paperwork is all signed. Got the keys in my hand. It feels good to own something real. You should try it sometime." "I'm so happy for you, Mark," I said, my voice dripping with a sincerity that was, in its own way, completely genuine. I was happy he had the house. Its existence was a crucial part of the story I was about to tell. "The folks are coming over this weekend to see it," he continued, oblivious. "They're so proud. You know, Dad said this was the best use of their money he could imagine, a real foundation for the family." "I'm sure he did," I said, looking at the portrait that was, quite literally, becoming my foundation. The final piece of my plan involved Julian himself. During our last sitting, as I was adding the final touches, I gathered my courage. "Julian," I began, my heart thumping. "I know we discussed the unveiling event, and Alina mentioned the bonus you sometimes include for the artist." He looked at me, his expression open and encouraging. "Yes, of course. Have you given it some thought? A trip, new equipment, whatever you feel would best serve your art?" "I have," I said, taking a deep breath. "What would best serve my art, more than anything, is peace of mind. The kind of security that allows an artist to create without constant financial anxiety." He nodded, listening intently. "You recently acquired a portfolio of properties," I stated, keeping my voice steady. "Northwood Properties." His eyes widened slightly in surprise. I did. How did you know that? My parents live in one of those buildings, I said. They've been there for 30 years. They're wonderful people, but they're on a fixed income, and they're terrified that their new landlord, you, is going to price them out of their home. I watched his face as he processed this incredible coincidence. A look of amazement dawned, followed by a soft chuckle. Well, of all the buildings in all the city, the mother and father of the artist who saw the soul in City Dweller. Life is wonderfully strange, isn't it? It is, I agreed. They're good people, Julian. My father is an engineer, my mother a librarian. They worked hard their whole lives. They also recently gave almost all of their life savings to my brother for a down payment on a house, because he convinced them he was the more sensible investment. I let that last part hang in the air. Julian's perceptive gaze sharpened. He was connecting the dots, seeing the shape of the story I was laying out for him. I see, he said slowly, a deep understanding in his voice. And this brother, he doesn't see the value in your chosen profession. He sees me as a liability, a struggling artist, I confirmed. A slow smile spread across Julian's face. He understood completely. He didn't just see the family drama, he saw the poetry of the situation. He saw the potential for a masterpiece, not just on the canvas, but in life. So, for your bonus, he said, his eyes twinkling, what do you have in mind? I want to give them security, I said. For the unveiling, I want my entire family there. My parents and my brother. And when you give your speech, I was hoping you might mention your new properties and your new tenants. As for the bonus, I don't want a check. I want you to cover my parents' rent. Julian leaned back, a look of pure delight on his face. For how long? 5 years, I said, the number feeling bold and audacious. As part of my total compensation package, I want my family to hear it from you. I want them to understand that my art, the thing they dismissed, is what secured their future. Julian Croft stood up and walked over to the canvas. He stared at his own likeness for a long moment, at the power and warmth I had managed to capture. He then turned to me, his smile wider than I had ever seen it. Alice, he said, his voice full of admiration. That is the most creative compensation package I have ever heard of. Consider it done. The unveiling is going to be a night to remember. As I left his home that day, I felt a sense of calm and certainty I had never known. The portrait was finished. The plan was in motion. All that was left was the final, beautiful, devastating brushstroke. Chapter 6: The Unveiling. The gallery was buzzing. Soft light bathed the high white walls, illuminating the works of art. A murmur of cultured conversation filled the space, punctuated by the clinking of champagne glasses. This was the world I had always dreamed of inhabiting, not as a guest or a caterer, but as the main attraction. My name was on the invitati. Ons on the placard next to the velvet-draped easel. A portrait of vision, Julian Croft by Alice Hayes. I stood near the entrance, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, my heart a frantic hummingbird in my chest. I watched the city's elite mingle art critics, collectors, tech executives, city officials. And then I saw them. My family. They looked entirely out of place, adrift in a sea of cocktail dresses and tailored suits. My mother was clutching her purse like a life raft, her eyes wide. My father looked stiff and uncomfortable in his best, 20-year-old suit. And Mark looked around with an air of smug disdain, as if he were an anthropologist studying a strange, primitive tribe. Alice, my mother called out, rushing over to give me a hug. Oh, look at all this, it's very fancy. Are you nervous? A little, I admitted. Well, don't be, my father said, patting my arm awkwardly. It's a lovely little show. We're very proud of you for, putting yourself out there. The condescension, however gentle, was still there. A lovely little show. Mark swaggered over, a glass of champagne already in his hand. Not bad, sis, not bad. Rubbing elbows with the bigwigs. Just don't forget who owns the actual real estate. He winked, taking a triumphant sip. He thought this was my little moment in the sun before I returned to my real life of obscurity. He had no idea the sun was about to cause a fire. Julian Croft arrived shortly after, and the energy in the room shifted, coalescing around him. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, greeting everyone warmly. When he saw me, he broke into a wide smile and came over to my family. "You must be the Hayes family," he said, extending a hand to my father. "I'm Julian Croft. Your daughter is a phenomenal talent, truly." My father, flustered to be shaking hands with a billionaire, mumbled his thanks. My mother just stared, starstruck. Mark, however, saw an opportunity. He stepped forward, shaking Julian's hand with his firm, lawyerly grip. "Mark Hayes, Alice's brother, corporate law, it's a pleasure, sir. Alice has told us so much about this project. It's wonderful that you support smaller artists." The implication was clear. I was a charity case, a quaint hobby he was indulging. Julian's smile didn't falter, but I saw a knowing glint in his eye. "Alice is no smaller artist, Mark. She's a visionary. You're about to see that for yourself." The moment arrived. Julian and I took our places by the draped easel. The room fell silent. Julian gave a short, gracious speech about his belief in the arts and his admiration for my work. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I scanned the crowd and found my family. My parents looked on with nervous pride. Mark had a bored, impatient look on his face. "And now," Julian said, his voice resonating through the gallery, "I am thrilled to present the incredible work of Alice Hayes." With a flourish, he pulled the velvet rope. The cloth slid away. A collective gasp went through the room. A wave of applause started, growing in volume and intensity. The portrait seemed to command the space, radiating a light and power all its own. It was, without a doubt, the best work of my life. I saw critics nodding, collectors murmuring to each other. It was a success. But I was only watching my family. My mother's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears of genuine awe. My father stared, his jaw slack, as if seeing me for the first time. For the first time, he wasn't seeing his struggling daughter. He was seeing a creator, a master of her craft. Mark's reaction was the most telling. His smug smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. The sheer scale and quality of the work, the thunderous applause, it didn't compute with his narrative of me. He looked from the portrait to me and back again, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Julian stepped forward again, holding up a hand for quiet. "Thank you. Alice has not only captured my likeness, she has captured a story. And speaking of stories, I have one more small announcement to make tonight." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before landing, deliberately, on my parents. "As some of you know, my company is dedicated to investing in communities. We recently acquired a property portfolio in the Northwood district, with the aim of revitalizing the neighborhood without displacing its long-term residents." I saw my parents exchange a nervous glance. Mark frowned, trying to understand the relevance. "It was the most wonderful coincidence," Julian continued, his voice warm, "to learn that two of those residents are the parents of our brilliant artist, Alice. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I'm so glad you could be here tonight." Every head in the vicinity turned toward my parents. They looked utterly bewildered. Mark's face went pale. The color drained from it as if a plug had been pulled. He was finally final. Lie connecting the dots. "And that brings me to the compensation package for this masterpiece," Julian said, his voice booming with theatrical generosity. "Alice is a savvy negotiator. She didn't just want a check. She wanted to invest in her family. So, as the final part of her payment for this portrait, Croft Enterprises is pleased to announce that we will be covering Susan and David Hayes' rent in their family home for the next 5 years." Silence, utter, complete pin-drop silence. And then my mother let out a sob. Not a sad one, but one of overwhelming, convulsive relief and joy. My father wrapped an arm around her, his own eyes shining with tears as he stared at me, his expression one of profound, world-altering shock. I looked at Mark. His face was a mask of pure devastation. It was the look of a man who had built his entire identity on being the smart one, the successful one, the pillar of the family, only to watch that pillar crumble into dust in a public forum. He had played chess and declared checkmate, not realizing the pawn he'd sacrificed had just become the queen and captured his king. The story he had told everyone, the story he had told himself, had just been erased and rewritten. And I was the one holding the pen, or in my case, the brush. The applause started again, this time not just for the painting, but for the story, for the grand, poetic gesture. I just stood there, smiling, letting it all wash over me. Chapter 7, A New Foundation. The ride back to my parents' apartment was silent. Not the comfortable silence of shared understanding, but the dense, charged silence of a world turned upside down. My father drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, his eyes fixed on the road, but clearly seeing something else entirely. My mother sat in the passenger seat, occasionally dabbing her eyes with a tissue and sneaking glances at me in the rearview mirror, her expression a bewildered mix of pride and shame. Mark had refused to come with us. After the applause died down, he had muttered something about a headache and practically fled the gallery, his face ashen. The golden child had lost his shine. When we arrived, my mother immediately put the kettle on, a lifelong habit for dealing with any emotional crisis. My father stood in the middle of their living room, this familiar space that was now, suddenly, secure. He looked at the bookshelves he'd built, the worn armchair he loved, the photographs on the mantel. 5 years, Alice, he said, his voice raspy. He turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. The man is paying our rent for 5 years as payment to you. It was part of my contract, I said quietly, no triumph in my voice, only fact. I asked for it as my bonus. We gave Mark the money, my mother whispered from the kitchen doorway. Almost everything. We thought he was the one who could give us all security. He told us it was the sensible thing to do, my father added, shaking his head in disbelief. A house of his own, a foundation, and all this time you were building this. He gestured vaguely, as if encompassing the gallery, the portrait, Julian Croft, and this entire, unbelievable evening. We had no idea. I know, I said, and that was the heart of it. They didn't know because they never looked. They never asked the right questions. They saw what they wanted to see, one success and one struggle. We owe you an apology, Alice, my father said, his voice thick with emotion. It was a sentence I had never in my life expected to hear from him. We underestimated you. We dismissed your work, your passion. We were wrong. My mother came over and took my hands, her own were trembling. We were so focused on what we were afraid of for you that we never saw what you were capable of. Can you ever forgive us? Tears welled in my own eyes. All the years of feeling invisible, of being the afterthought, of swallowing my hurt, it all came rushing to the surface. But seeing them now, stripped of their certainty and their misguided practicality, I felt no anger. Only a deep, sad tenderness. There's nothing to forgive, I said, and I meant it. I love you, I just wanted you to see me, to see what I do as real. It's real, my father said, with a conviction that shook me. My God, it's the realest thing in the world. We talked for another hour, the conversation stilted at first, then flowing into a current of honesty that had been dammed up for years. I told them about the commission, about Julian, about how hard I'd worked to get to this point. And they listened. For the first time, they truly listened. Mark didn't call for 3 days. When he finally did, it wasn't to me, but to our parents. He screamed at them. He accused me of orchestrating a public humiliation. He accused them of making him look like a fool. He couldn't grasp the reality of the situation. He could only see it through the lens of his own shattered ego. His founda. Tian, the one built on their savings and his sense of superiority, had proven to be made of sand. He and I haven't spoken since. The rift is too deep, his pride too wounded. Perhaps one day that will change, but it won't be up to me. My life, however, has changed completely. The portrait of Julian Croft was a critical and commercial triumph. It led to a flood of new commission requests from people who didn't just want a painting, but wanted a story told by Alice Hayes. I finally moved out of my small apartment and rented a proper, spacious studio with brilliant northern light. I no longer waitress. I am no longer a struggling artist. I am just an artist. My relationship with my parents has been rebuilt on a new foundation, one of mutual respect. They are still my parents, and they still worry, but it's different now. They ask about my work with genuine interest. They celebrate my successes. They see me.